All right, we're going to do a little clap. Seth.
Aaron.
Liron.
Awesome. Liron, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate your time, man. How did you come about capturing that iconic eclipse photo with the raven flying through? Is it a raven or a crow? I can't remember.
It's neither. It's a magnificent frigate bird.
A frigate bird. That's even better for the story.
Yeah.
I think everyone knows the photo we're talking about. I'm sure it bounced across so many listeners' feeds. That bird flying with its wing perfectly touching the edge of the... Is it in totality in that photo? Just about, huh?
Yeah, it's totality. It's the diamond ring, which is like the 10 seconds right at the start or end of totality when the very edge of the sun starts peeking out.
Yeah, and Aaron, maybe we can pop that up on YouTube. If you don't mind, Liron, if just so for people watching there can reference it. If you want to go see that, you can also check out Liron's page, which is always linked to our guests in the episode description. So tell us more about what went into that shot. That's not just a random happen to be there, get the shot. And I think it speaks a lot to planning and executing a long-term vision. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that photo was well over a year kind of in the making. It was an idea that I'd had probably like sometime in 2022. So like close to a couple of years before the actual eclipse. I was like, it'd be like the coolest photo ever, a bird flying across of a total solar eclipse. I kind of have a background mostly in wildlife photography. Birds have kind of been one thing that I photographed for most of my life. A lot of that probably being just because they're what's accessible. When you live in a city, like you don't see bears and wolves on a daily basis, but you see birds. So I've always loved photographing birds. And I also, for a long time, thanks to actually a super inspirational grade 8, 9 science teacher, I've been into like space and like night sky astrophotography stuff. So I'm always on the lookout for those rare opportunities to try to combine the birds and the celestial bodies, the night sky, space, all this sort of stuff. And yeah, I spent like close to like over a year planning this. And it all eventually came together this past April during the 4 minutes and 20 seconds of totality. And I was just situated on a little boat off the coast of Mazatlan on the west coast of Mexico.
Right. Oh, so you're on the water shooting this on top of it.
Yes, I was on a boat, which is definitely an untraditional way of photographing something like an eclipse, which normally you'd be using like a tripod and you'd be all set up with everything to go. But I needed to maximize my chances to get a bird in front of the eclipse. Obviously, it's not something that just is likely to randomly happen. And there's these small islets off the coast of Mazatlan that have a lot of like magnificent frigate birds and blue-footed boobies and all these seabirds that come and roost and nest on these little islets. And I figured that would be my best chance. So in order to kind of get in a position where these birds would be flying around in the sky in front of the eclipse, I had to get on a boat and situate myself like right next to these little islands.
Right. So this is total eclipse happens 1 to 3 years, you said, right? In your caption, somewhere on the planet. This is a year of planning and 4.5 minutes to execute. How do you stay composed? Were you frantic? I mean, that's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of time and energy sunk into something that can just very easily not be captured.
Absolutely. And I think the mindset that I had to have heading into this, which is kind of a mindset I try to carry throughout all of my photography, is like, this very well couldn't happen, and that's okay. Like, I might not get this photo, and that's fine. I'm going to be out here. I'm going to be in the moment. I'm going to enjoy the experience. So because I kind of tried to come into it with as much of that mindset as possible, I do feel like I was pretty calm. I think it's impossible not to have like a little bit of nerves in that situation, because it's like, who knows? It'll be years before the next opportunity to do something like this. But I did feel like I was quite well prepared. Like I'd been scouting and researching for a long time. It wasn't even my first time sitting on the boat by these islands. Like I'd done a practice run where we went out a couple days earlier with the boat, got into position right underneath these islands during the time that the eclipse would be. I'd been keeping an eye on the island at nighttime too, which is because with the idea that, okay, during an eclipse, the birds might think that it's nighttime because basically day turns to night during a total eclipse. So I had a lot of practice and preparation that I think helped keep the confidence levels reasonably high.
Yeah, I mean, that's in a weird way when you choose to pursue something that's very difficult And you know in your mind that no matter how much you practice, how much you plan, how prepared you are, things can still go wrong. In a weird way, that almost alleviates a lot of pressure. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree. To be honest, the thing that I felt the most pressure about in this situation was kind of the buildup. There were clouds in the forecast, and that meant that in the week leading up to the eclipse, I was just kind of scouting around Sinaloa on the west coast of Mexico, trying to find like backup options, because it was looking like, if you drove a couple hours, it might be able to kind of escape some of this cloud cover, and did manage to find backup options, but ultimately went with my gut, went with plan A, taking the risk that we could be clouded out. But I was like, I'm going to take this risk to try to get the photo in the place that it's most likely to happen. So yeah.
Right. So you mentioned, I guess you kind of have that, I want to say detached, but not in a negative term. Just whatever happens, happens. Not having certain expectations, being hopeful, but not having dead set expectations of certain situations. How has that served you elsewhere? I mean, I'm using this photo kind of as a metaphor for some other topics throughout this episode, and this is one of them. But that's very useful, I think, for people going into something, trying your best, and not setting super high expectations for something, just going and trying and doing your best.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm like a really, really big planner when it comes to photography. So rather than just going out for a walk with my camera and seeing what I get, I do like to try to plan things out and pre-envision the photo that I'm going to try to capture before I take it. And that means that I'm usually not attempting photos that I think I'm just not going to get. If I thought the chance was just zero, I just wouldn't be trying. So I feel like I, in that way, kind of do set myself up for success a lot of the time. But anytime you're pursuing, I guess, such complicated and challenging photos, you're at the will of nature ultimately. And I think that as a professional wildlife photographer, if we were only satisfied and happy with ourselves when everything went perfectly to plan and we nailed the photo we were going after, it would be a pretty miserable pursuit, because, I probably end up sharing something like one for every close to 10,000 photos that I take. So I'd just be miserable all the time if I was only going to be happy and satisfied if I nailed the photo. So yeah, I think you just have to have this perspective of I'm doing everything that I can to try to get this photo. But if I don't get this photo, you know what? I just still had a really cool outdoor experience. Did I learn something? Probably, whether it was about photography, whether it was about nature. As long as you're kind of enjoying it and learning as you go, I kind of see that as a success.
Right. So you've captured this photo. You've got the shot you want, I imagine, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's sitting on your SD card. Are you thinking to yourself, this is going to do 250,000 likes on Instagram and possibly change my online persona? Or are you where's the headspace at when you've got a photo that you're really proud of before even sharing it?
Yeah. So in this particular case, I'd been so kind of involved and invested in the planning and the preparation and practice runs and making sure all the settings are programmed into the camera and everything, that I hadn't even really gotten to the stage of okay, now that I have the photo, what am I going to do with it? But as I guess someone who is, I guess, a content creator of some sort, I don't know exactly how I would describe what I do, but photographer, a little bit of a content creator, I do obviously recognize that when there's something like a total solar eclipse, there's a ton of hype in the moment for those next few days. And after that, things are going to die off. So I knew that, okay, I should probably get up this photo as fast as possible. So I had actually brought down a good friend of mine to film some behind the scenes. And we put together a little behind the scenes video, which is on YouTube. But because of that, I had some videos filmed of the taking of the photo. And I was thinking right away, okay, should probably just make a quick Instagram reel, TikTok of the taking of the photo and then the photo reveal. So that afternoon, the eclipse was at 11, 10 a.m. And sometime that afternoon, evening, I had posted the photo and posted the reel, kind of went to bed. And then I think by the time I woke up the next morning, the reel and TikTok had already in the low millions of views. So it was very much an instant overnight sort of thing.
Right. Was that, you can be honest, were you expecting that?
I was definitely expecting it to like do very well, whatever that means. I was definitely expecting it to get attention, but I was definitely not expecting it to like do as well as it did. And it was never like the goal. I didn't go take this photo to create a viral reel or something like that. It was very much like a personal, right. It was like, I want to achieve this goal I've had for like a couple of years, just for like my general enjoyment in my photography portfolio. But I was aware that, you know, it was something that could catch a lot of attention, and it ultimately did.
Yeah, that's important when you just said that it was a consequence of doing something you wanted to do.
Yeah. Which I think is kind of like photography is at its best when you're producing things that you want to produce, taking photos that you want to take, and then they end up being really successful. Because that doesn't always happen, but I think it's very cool when it does happen.
Yeah, Aaron, do you want to jump in at all, or should I keep going?
Yeah, just a couple questions. You had, how many seconds of totality did you have in that spot? 10 seconds? 45 seconds? What'd you say?
Yeah, so I was on the kind of near Mazatlan, just offshore. Oh, sorry, cut out there. So yeah, I was just off the coast of Mazatlan, and I had about 4 minutes and 20 seconds of totality to try to get the photo, which is actually a pretty long length of time for a total solar eclipse. But for getting any kind of wildlife photo, like, it's a pretty short length of time. So it was definitely like everything had to be just right, had to get in position before, totality began, where there were already birds flying around in order to get the shot. I had done actually a practice run during a partial solar eclipse in October 2023, where, in a partial solar eclipse, you have maybe like an hour and a half to get a bird lined up with the solar eclipse. And I managed to do it. But 4 minutes and 20 seconds is a completely different ballgame.
Yeah. So in that 4 minutes.
I'm just going to reduce my exposure. The sun came out. Okay. Sun started lighting my face there. So yeah, we're good.
Okay, I'm just going to make a note of where that happened at 12 minutes 22.
So in that 4 minutes and 20 some odd seconds, at what percent, or like what minute or second do you feel like, oh, I got the photo and the rest is kind of just gravy, or was it dwindling down to the ninth hour where you're like, this has got to happen? I'm just curious the drama within that 4 minutes.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this spot that I was photographing from by this island was the perfect spot for this. Like, I fully intend to try to recreate this with future eclipses, but I don't know if I'll ever have such a, like, quote unquote, it still wasn't easy, but like an easy spot to get a bird with the eclipse, because there were hundreds of birds in the sky the entire time the eclipse was going on, which was a factor of planning and finding the perfect spot where birds frequent both at daytime and nighttime. So like whatever they do during the eclipse, they're going to be there. So, I mean, I think like immediately, basically, I was getting photos with birds in front of the eclipse. But the photo that was my favorite, and the one that kind of went viral, was taken at the very, very end, the last few seconds of the totality, in that diamond ring phase, they call it, because it looks like a diamond ring when the edge of the sun starts to poke out. So that was right at the last possible second when I captured the photo that was ultimately my favorite shot.
Why do you think this photo was so well received?
That's a really good question.
Aside from it being great, do you think it's simply because it's so unique, or do you think there's more to it? I mean, this is a question about knowing your audience, I guess, here.
I think what it is, and I kind of try to apply this principle to like all the photos that I take whenever I can. I think what it is like, a total solar eclipse is a rare event. So it's something that's going to excite people. It's very beautiful. So naturally, it's like a visually appealing photo that people are going to connect with. But when something like a total solar eclipse happens, like social media gets flooded with hundreds, thousands, I mean, honestly, probably millions of photos of the exact same thing. And everyone wants to get like on the subject. Everyone's excited about it. So like a lot of people are going to be like sharing a photo of the eclipse, but they're not going to be sharing all 10,000 photos of the eclipse that might pop up in their feed. So I think the reason it it like kind of got the attention it did is just because of like how unique it was. It was like the photo of the eclipse that there was only one of. It was a unique take on a familiar, special sight. So it was like a one-of-a-kind photo of a hugely photographed thing. So whenever there's these photographic occasions, like the northern lights are out, or there's a total solar eclipse, or maybe it's just like a really popular spot to photograph bears, I always kind of like to go into it with that approach, is like, how can I take a photo in this moment that will be different from all the other photos that are being taken at the same moment of the same scene?
Yeah, it's great advice in an industry that's super saturated. So I'm glad you said that. Okay, so I think other people will be. I think on this podcast, and I would imagine other podcasts that are in the photography genre as well, we get a lot more clicks when social media is mentioned. Now, that doesn't mean we're just going to make episodes about social media. That's not. We don't want to become. We don't want to become the content, if that makes sense. But I think people who are interested in growing their social media or getting better engagement, all that things are going to be sitting there listening, asking themselves, okay, did this. First, I'm going to say you're an incredible photographer beyond just this photo. I don't want people to think that you're like you are this photo. Just before we move on any further, and we're gonna get into the second half of this interview about some other stuff. It's not going to all be about this photo, but people listening may be saying, okay, well, 250,000 likes, more than that, tons of comments, super well received. Did this do anything for your photography career?
Ooh, that's a really, really good question. I think the answer is I don't know. I do think that you don't need like a big social media following or anything to pursue photography professionally. I think the core audience is what matters. Like there needs to be, it's a thing that's commonly said, but you have to have like a small group of people who really care about your work and maybe want to learn from you, if that's kind of the way that you make your career in photography, or maybe a small group of people that love your work and want it on their walls, if that's the way that you make a living in photography. So I do think that it like certainly doesn't hurt whatsoever. It gets a lot of eyes on your work, but I've always been a little bit skeptical of reels. And honestly, I'm curious of your thoughts on this too. Like I've been skeptical of like the strategy of like blowing up on social media with like short form content like reels, and how it actually contributes to like a career in photography. Because right. I've kind of been under the impression that like it certainly opens up avenues in terms of like more of like the influencer type thing. Like, oh, you might get more likely to get a sponsorship, or you can maybe get to go on trips for free because you have like a large following to kind of use to promote things and stuff like that. But from like a professional photography perspective, I don't know that the people who are following your work because they saw one of your videos for 10 seconds are like the people who are going to convert into clients that actually make you able to do it as a career. So from that perspective, I don't really think it made a big difference in that area. But I will say that one thing I have learned since this reel has gone viral is that as an artist, when you have a viral reel like this, you can actually have great potential in selling your work directly. Like there was a big response in terms of like selling prints of the eclipse photo as a result of so many eyes being on it. And that was kind of nice. But for a long-term career thing, I think it's kind of still remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, unless my take on it, because you're asking.
Yeah.
My take on it is Instagram, all this stuff, and I mean, and this is obvious. Maybe it's not. It's a funnel. Like you have to be doing something else. Are you selling a course? Are you selling a product? Are you selling something? I mean, if you're interested in a large following, I think equating to income, it can't just be, I don't think it can just be the influencer marketing. I really don't. I think that's for very few people.
Yeah.
At least, I mean, I'm kind of apathetic towards social media to a degree. Everybody who listens to this knows that. But I do see the importance of it. And I do think that engaging and consistent content allows people to dig deeper into other things you are offering of value beyond just the scroll.
Yeah. That's, I think, a very good assessment.
And you just said it yourself there. You're like, yeah, this photo did great and I was able to sell prints. That's how people should be thinking. I think if income is important, I realize not everybody listening is interested in generating income from photography. Some people just want to get better and have fun and get better shots, which I totally respect.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I think there's a fallacy in thought sometimes that as soon as you go viral, as soon as you have 100,000 followers, as soon as you have 1 million likes, then you'll get money thrown to you. Where I think it's kind of the reverse. Like you have to have something that you're selling, whether it's your time, a product, prints. You have to have something for people to funnel to. It doesn't just happen automatically because you have a following or a really cool reel or a really funny idea or a really cool picture. It's not just going to automatic happen. And as we all know, social media is like a 24, 48 hour thing. And then a post goes away. Like if you're not following it up with something, you're in trouble. And I would bet that with your prints, you kind of had to move and have those available immediately. Otherwise, that buzz of the eclipse and the buzz of the reel and the buzz of the whole moment kind of goes away. So it's got to be, you got to have something there for people to come and take a look at and check out and be like, oh, this guy also does workshops. Let me click on that and see where that is. If you don't have anything, people will be like, that was cool content, and move on to the next scroll. So I think it's this fallacy sometimes that people are like, I'll make it when I have 50,000 followers. I'll start a course when I have 100,000 followers. And I think it's almost too late. Like you have to have that ready and then work up towards it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good segue.
Good segue. I'm just going to close these blinds a bit so I don't have to worry about the sunlight overexposing.
No worries. No worries.
Yeah, let's do it.
Good segue, Aaron. Thanks for setting that up, because I wanted to, in the second half of this, touch on something I don't think we really have, and it's going to be really useful for people who are interested in running photo tours. Bald Eagle Photo Workshop next summer. You have Great Bear Rainforest tours this year. Bird Photography Workshop later in October and November, right, in Ecuador. I'm looking at your Owls of Alberta Photo Workshop in February of 2025. So it seems like you know how to run a workshop. And I think there's a lot of people listening who are, either I'd like to do that someday, or I really feel like I'm at a stage where I'm ready for that, to do my first one, and I have no idea how to start. Maybe we can start this topic, this second half, with your very first photo workshop you ran, how you knew you were ready, and kind of the details of it.
Ooh, yeah. This is a really good topic. And
Sweet.
I think it's also important to acknowledge that, like, in the market of professional wildlife photography in 2024, the workshops are how a lot of people make ends meet, because people are eager for experiences, and they want to learn how to be a better photographer while experiencing things. So I think this is kind of one of the key areas of profession and career for a, quote unquote professional wildlife photographer. So my path with workshops is kind of unique. And that's mostly because I've just been really into photography and all that from like a really, really young age. So believe it or not, I landed my first ever client for like a little photography, just like half-day workshop when I was 14 years old. And the person knew I was 14 years old. Like, it wasn't a surprise or anything. But like, I had been sharing images on the internet. I had developed an area of expertise, at least in my local neighborhood, of like photographing shorebirds on their migration and knowing where the best spots were to get good photos of shorebirds. And that was a market that attracted people. And they were like, oh, well, I want to get good shots of shorebirds. And I kind of like this 14-year-old shorebird photos. And you know what? I think, like, looking back on it, like, it's kind of crazy, like, that at that age, people were already kind of trusting me. But I also really like think that it's super cool that like people are willing to trust and be that open-minded to learn from someone who's like a teenager. So I think that's why I have the best clients in the world, because like there are a lot of people who are like so open-minded. They started coming on trips with me when I was like a teenager, but that kind of developed more and more as I got a little older. When I kind of finished university, I did a biology degree at UBC. And when I finished that, I kind of just knew and already had a plan and kind of was ready to jump right into doing group photography workshops full time. And the first ever photography workshop I did was, what was it? I mean, I did like a little, like I did some like 1-2 day photography things around like Vancouver. We've like a lot of waterfowl in Vancouver, but that very quickly kind of stepped up to like, you know, like 5-6 day trips, like photographing bald eagles and whales and bears around Vancouver Island, photographing bears, whales and wolves in the Great Bear Rainforest. Then, you know, like photographing owls in Alberta, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's been a fun journey, and I really enjoyed doing it. Yeah, I don't know if you have other. I'm sure you have more questions to dig into on this. Yeah,
I'm going to adopt the mind of somebody listening right now. I'm going to put myself in their shoes and try and ask all the questions I would want to ask if I was figuring out from somebody who is succeeding in running workshops how I could do my first one. That's kind of the approach I'm taking.
Yeah,
or refine. If I've already done a couple, refine it. So we talked about funnels earlier. What do you think was and or is now, if that's changed, your main funnel for getting people to sign up? Obviously past clients, right?
Yeah.
You develop a level of rapport and trust that you can deliver. But before that, maybe, how do you convince people to sign up for your workshop, that you know what you're doing, that they're going to get value, that they're going to learn, that they're going to get great shots, that they're going to get better? How do you convince people of that? Does that happen naturally? Do you have to take on a sales role? I'll leave it with you.
So I think there's two main reasons people sign up for a photography workshop. One is the photographer who's leading it. So oftentimes they have followed the work of the photographer for a while, and they are maybe impressed with the work, or they think there's something they can learn about, or maybe they just like that photographer's personality. And whatever it is, there's something that makes them want to go on a trip with that photographer. So I think that's one area. And then the other thing that makes someone sign up for a workshop, I think, is the experience that is being offered, and what is the actual destination. And I actually think these are pretty equally important. I would probably say like the person offering the workshop is probably more important than even the exact experience or the destination.
Why?
So the reason for that, I think, is simply because like there are so many trips that like a photographer can sign up for that are being offered in the world. Like the market is, as niche of a career as doing wildlife photography workshops is, the market is huge. Like there are infinite trips that you could sign up for. So what is going to make someone want to sign up for your workshop that you're offering over someone else's? I don't know. I'm still figuring that out, but I think it has to be along the lines of the person that is offering the workshop, obviously combined with like the destination. I think the destination is what gets people like excited about it, but like the person offering the workshop is important, because how do people find out about the workshop that you're offering? Usually it's not because they were just Googling, oh, I want to photograph eagles on Vancouver Island, especially since a lot of workshops are like can be relatively unknown things that are being photographed. They don't have a big internet presence. I think it's more so like people follow their favorite photographers. They follow them on social media. They sign up for their email newsletter. Maybe they come out to some of their in-person events. Another one that people sometimes find me for is I do a lot of like presentations for like photo clubs in Vancouver, and since COVID also all around the world. And people, whatever it is, whatever way you're kind of reaching people, they end up following you on social media. They end up on your email list. And then when you offer an experience and they were thinking about maybe doing some kind of wildlife trip, they want to jump on board. I think that I still have like a lot to learn in terms of even understanding, even within my own client base, where and why and how exactly people are coming. But I do think like it is a really important area to be constantly thinking about.
All right. So yeah, I mean, that's a great point, because I think doing the camera club stuff, right, and doing in-person stuff, people have followed your work online. They see the quality of the work. Okay, check. But then when you do those other things where it's a camera club talk or a meetup, they get to see the personality, and I feel like they gain confidence in who you are, your personality, how you speak. People have, a sense of others' levels of confidence. So I think that's important. And I think it's also important, as I'm sitting here listening to that, people can do that without having to go physically give a talk. I mean, you can hop on Instagram Live and people can get that sense, right? I think it goes back to our discussion about the funnel too, right? You're constantly funneling people to something else, not necessarily as I want to make money, but if you're interested in income, you got to be thinking about that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like part of the reason, part of the reason like it's not something that everyone does is just because I think to do a career in that area, it does require, like, obviously you need to be a photographer with some level of like wildlife photography experience. You don't have to be like the best in the world or anything, but you need to have some level of wildlife photography experience. You also need to have, I would say this is like really up there with some of the most important stuff. You need to have some level of, I guess, comfortable people skills and be comfortable like talking with people and educating and standing up in front of a group and presenting, which is something that some people have naturally and some people work on, but can work on and very successfully develop that area of their skill set. And then you also kind of need to think of it like a business, which is, I kind of joke like it's unfortunate because I don't think wildlife photographers get into wildlife photography, or any professional photographer in general gets into it because they were like, I want to be a business person.
Right.
But ultimately, if you're going to do it as your career, it is kind of important to think of it a little bit in that way and think about like, what is it that people are looking for, and how can I, with my skill set that I have, I guess, give offerings that provide things that people want to do and maybe solve some of their problems. Like, I want to get good photos of wildlife. Well, here's a way to do that.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned comfortability. I think you, as the person leading the workshop too, you need to have a level of comfortability in the place.
Mm-hmm. Right? Absolutely.
I mean, like, I'm not taking people out to California out on the water on my own, right? I mean, that's not to say that you can't run a workshop in a place you've never been. I mean, being outside and experiencing wildlife in general, especially when there's wildlife of similar species in different areas, I mean, that's experience, right? I mean, we just ran a trip in Alaska and we hadn't been to Alaska, but we've known tons of people that have gone to Alaska. We asked tons of questions. We've photographed a lot of the animals that are there. We've photographed mountains before. It's like there was a level of comfortability despite not having gone there, right? Last year we did a trip in Jasper, and heart goes out to Jasper, all my Canadians. I don't know if you guys have seen that. Oh my God, devastating.
Tragic.
Yeah, that one hurt. But we did that last year, and I had been 4 times. So like I had the confidence to be able to go with Aaron and bring people, and like this, I kind of know where I am. I think it's important that you kind of are not winging it into place. Or like if you're doing a bird workshop, I guess, like knowing your local birds in your area, just being an expert in a very small, in an area, right?
Yeah, totally. I think that one of the things that is super important when you're like, actually, you've like decided, okay, I think I have the market. I think I have the clients, the interest for a workshop. Ultimately, the location and experience that you craft is really important, because it can't just be the coolest thing you can dream of. Oftentimes, that's also the hardest thing to sell, because it can be very competitive to go run a trip with grizzly bears in Alaska or a safari in Africa. Right. Those can be very competitive markets. So I think the area for success is to, especially if you're starting and you're like, I'm going to try to find one workshop, is like find a location and a photographic opportunity that is a genuinely really good photographic opportunity that is possible to photograph with like a small group of people. And 2, have it be something that is personal to you, that you have experience with, and that maybe is somewhat unique. And I think that is the key for like starting out with photo workshops, is like the thing that you're offering has to be unique in some way. Because if you don't have like a huge base of people who are already kind of coming on your trips, it's really hard to sell a workshop to like a really competitive, sought after location, because there's just so many options for people. Mm-hmm. But finding a spot that is unique, that maybe you know better than anyone else, like that is a reason for people to come with you.
Yeah. And what do you think a good duration is for somebody who's looking to do their first or second workshop?
That's a really good question. I think to set a duration for a trip, you need to think a little bit about who the people are that are coming on the trip. If your market is like people who live really close to the area where you're doing the trip, like say if I live in Vancouver, Canada, if I'm doing a photo workshop that's in Vancouver or maybe on Vancouver Island or somewhere nearby, and I think that I'm going to be selling this to people who live in Vancouver and Vancouver Island, I find shorter is often the way to go. Like 3-4 days. You can even start with like a 1 day, 2 day experience to see kind of what the interest is level before you jump into offering like longer things. If you're doing a workshop in a more remote destination where you know the people coming to that trip are just going to be jumping on a plane, like something like the Great Bear Rainforest or something like Ecuador, a couple of the places where I guide trips. Usually when people are already traveling that far and getting to a remote area, they don't want to go for 3 days. They want to go for a longer period of time. So I think like a week is a really good length for like really more adventurous trips. Like the trip I'm doing to Ecuador is 2 weeks. So it has to be a combination of thinking about, I guess, who's coming on this trip. And also a really important consideration that I didn't mention is how long do you genuinely think you will need to get to like properly experience this area and to get some nice photos?
Right. And so when you're on location, what, in your opinion, is the most important thing you can do to make sure everybody is happy? And also two-parter. How much you can go overboard with teaching?
Yes.
Right. What's the balance between I'll offer advice when asked versus I need to spew as much knowledge as possible?
Yeah. Okay. So second question was teaching. What was the first one again?
Well, maybe they blend together. What the most important part is as kind of a manager of the trip when you're on location, managing people essentially and personalities.
Yeah. Well, I'll start there. It's honestly really difficult to say like one thing that is the most important to make sure everyone's happy, because it totally depends on the group that you have. It totally depends on where you are and what type of trip it is. I think part of that duty falls on me as the person who's planning the trip to make sure I'm leading a trip in a place that is just going to guarantee that people are happy, right? I don't want to be leading a workshop to a place where we might not see anything. Or if I am trying to do a workshop where we're maybe going after something really elusive like a wolf, where, we might not have success, it needs to be like just a spectacular, beautiful area where people are going to have a good time regardless. So I would say the base of that, making sure people are happy, is making sure that the experience that you're offering is genuinely an exceptional experience that like anyone would have a good time on, kind of regardless if a bunch of things go wrong, like people are going to have a good time. As far as the teaching part of the question, like how much do you teach? My approach for this, it varies based on the trip. But I often have workshops where we have time in the field. Maybe we have time in the field when the light is really good and when there's the best wildlife activities. Maybe that's like closer to sunrise and sunset. And then we might have time of day when the light isn't as good or the wildlife isn't as active. That is a little more downtime, a little more kind of rest time. So how I often kind of do my trips is like when the wildlife activity is good and the light is good, like we are out photographing and that's kind of the priority. And then in the times when the activity isn't as good, or maybe if it's like a winter trip and the days are shorter and we have like time in the evenings when it's dark, I will do actual like in-person, like in a nice space, like workshop sessions where we talk about camera settings, we talk about composition, we talk about lighting, we actually look in people's cameras and figure out how to set their cameras if that's the level they're at. Or some people are more interested in like post-processing and editing photos. So I kind of split the trips into field component and like learning component, prioritizing the field time when there's action in the field and prioritizing the learning time when it's night, it's like dark, or when the activity isn't there, like in the middle of the day.
Right. Now, this is a bit of an interesting question. You don't have to, kind of give away all the secret sauce, but obviously people are paying a premium for one of those things you mentioned, either to, be around you, to learn more, maybe both of those things. Like that's what people are paying for, as opposed to just going and booking a trip to that location themselves and winging it, right? Like there's a premium for that feature. So how are you? I know this is much more detailed, but figuring out how to price a trip for somebody who has like no idea where to begin.
Yeah, that is really, really tough. So the first thing I do when I'm pricing out a trip is obviously you need to figure out how much is it going to cost to put on that trip. And you need to figure out kind of what your like break even numbers are. The next thing I kind of do is I try to look at the market and I try to find comparable trips. Now, a lot of the trips that I lead, there might not necessarily be like a one-to-one comparable trip in the same spot, but very oftentimes you can find like analogous trips in other parts of the world, or, you know, just like similar trips, and see where they're priced. And I usually just kind of see that and I try to fall within the market. I feel like I honestly am not like I'm by no means the biggest expert in like knowing how to price a workshop. Understood. I feel like it's constantly something I am like thinking about and trying to figure out. One thing I do with all my trips though, in order to kind of constantly learn more, is it's obviously really important to me as like someone who's putting together these trips to know what my clients are thinking after the trip. Like, did they get the value that they paid for? So I always send like feedback forms to clients after the trips. And one of those questions is, what did you think of the price point of the workshop? And, you know, were there things you expected to get that you didn't get, or were there things that you got that you didn't expect to get? And usually people are very happy with the price point of the workshop, and everyone says, oh, it was great value, which is probably where you want to be, like, rather than you want to be, I guess, somewhere in that area. You don't want to be people saying, oh, I think I way overpaid for this. But it is tough, I think. But I definitely rely on just looking at what are the offerings on the market and kind of placing myself somewhere in line with what I see being the market value.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And then, so obviously, well, maybe not, but are you advertising these on your socials and captions and stories, et cetera? And if so, how do you have a strategy for that? Is this as simple as mentioning it in the caption with a photo? You know, is there a plan of attack when advertising something you have coming up?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Sorry, I'm just going to do one more exposure adjustment before I...
No worries.
Sorry, the lighting is changing all the time.
You guys like Scorsese over here. Director.
Okay. Yeah, so the flow for... and so how I approach marketing these trips, I kind of identify my different audience pools. So usually what I do when I'm going to launch a workshop is there are usually a really core audience of repeat customers that I have, who they are in communication with me enough, whether that's just through Instagram messages or whether they've come on my trips, that they usually have some idea of the trips that I'm like going to do that I haven't necessarily publicly announced yet. So I will usually send out an email to like those people and be like, hey, just so you know, I'm about to launch this trip. Let me know if you're interested and I can send you more info. So that's kind of like level one. Level two is like, I would say my mailing list, my email list. So I will usually send like a general announcement to my email list. Sometimes I'll segment that. Like sometimes I'll do one email blast to the people who have already expressed interest in me in a trip like this. And then I'll send out an email to like my general mailing list, like everyone on the mailing list, packaged with some other stuff like behind the scenes and photo tips of like, okay, this is the workshop announcement. And then usually after those 2-3 steps is when I'll do like the social media public announcement. There's kind of, I guess, I don't know if that's like the best way of doing it. That's just kind of like the approach that I've developed.
You're not obligated to have to advertise to everyone. I think that's important. Like you're totally allowed to go to people that you've had in the past and just say, hey, do you want to come? Do you want to come? Do you want to come? And like, you don't need, it doesn't need to be available to everybody.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely part of it. Like, it also is kind of a mechanism to try to get people to sign up for my mailing list as well from social media. Like I will often tease it on social media, be like, I'm going to be announcing a workshop, sign up for my mailing list to be the first to know sort of thing. Because it's hard to get your message out to people on social media. Like only a small percentage of your followers are going to see that. And I think it's tough to rely on that from like a business perspective. Like if I need to sell this trip, I can't rely on people hearing about it only on social media. Like I need to be emailing them. So part of it is it's like exactly right. It's a way to get people to my email list, and where I just feel like I've better direct communication with people, where if there's something I want people to know, I feel like they're going to see the email. But also, I don't know if this is the right approach. It might not be. Like I'm still learning. I learn every single day doing this. But I also feel like for some reason I like to save the attention span of like my social media audience for like things that I really need to show them. Sometimes like I like to maintain a certain level of quality and lack of spamminess, I guess, for lack of a better word, on my social media. So if I don't have to be posting every single day marketing a trip, I won't. Like, I'd rather just share my favorite work. So I guess that's also part of the reason I take that approach, is because like if I can fill up a trip just with my mailing list, why burden the 95% of my social media audience that aren't in the market for the trip with like hearing a bunch of ads about the trip? That's kind of mentally one of my justifications for it, but I am totally interested in thoughts and feedback on what is the right way to do this, because I learn every single day doing this. Even on the trips, one of my favorite things about them is that I get to teach, but I also learn just from like watching my clients and chatting with my clients every single day. So
yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, we've done 3 now, and I can't tell you the amount of people who are seeing some of our Alaska content come out, and they're saying, "What? I didn't know that was a thing."
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking like, because I'm in my own world, I'm like, you know how hard we promoted that a lot, right? Because we're very new at running trips. We run one a year currently.
Yeah.
So I hear exactly what you're saying. If there's a way for you to guaranteed get the word out to people who have confirmed interest, either by signing up for your mailing list or having gone in the past, I mean, that's the smart way to do it. I mean, I think that's the most efficient.
Yeah. There's also a benefit to knowing the people that have gone before, and knowing the personalities, and knowing how to set up a trip or pivot based on the personalities that are going. So kind of knowing the characters ahead of time, and maybe getting a repeat customer or 2 or 3 really allows you to cater the trip really nicely, I think, to people versus what we think they will like, and you have no clue what their real activity level is, what their real food preferences are, what their sleep preferences are. Having an idea and pass and repeat customers must be just a stress relief, I would think.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's like a balance, because I don't want my trips to be like exclusive. Like I want anyone to be able to join them. Absolutely. Like that's always, so I always do at least do something on my social media, but also it's just easier to market when you have a mailing list of people who you already know are interested. Like it's a much more efficient way to use my time to like let them know about the trip, and that might sell the trip. So that saves me from having to draft a bunch of marketing stuff for social media.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. You want to be fair and you don't want to gatekeep, but you also want to be efficient with your time. So it's this weird balance, right?
Yeah.
How many trips do you feel you can handle a year?
That is a really good question. And I'm very much still in the earlier stage of my career. So it is something that I'm still constantly working on, is figuring out that work-life balance. I love traveling. I love exploring places. I actually, more than exploring new places, I love getting to know the places that I already know more and more and more, which is why I love leading workshops too, because you just spend more and more time in these same spots and you get to know them so well, and you uncover all the secrets of the wildlife there, or at least as much as the wildlife will reveal. But it also can be very tiring to constantly be traveling and going on trips. And the more time I spend away, as much as I absolutely love doing that, the more I usually appreciate coming home at the end of the trip as well, and just enjoying some time at home. So I think I'm honestly already kind of nearing the max capacity of the number of trips I'm doing, like a couple trips per season, like, 2-3 eagle workshops in the summer, 2-3 Great Barrier Rainforest trips in the fall, like a couple winter trips like Ecuador, and then maybe 2 couple weeks of like owl trips in February. And then I do some trips like up north for like birds and wildlife in the Yukon in like early June. So I feel like my calendar year gets pretty full off of what I have, which is maybe like approaching maybe 10 group trips a year, probably about 10 a year. I don't know if I would push it much further than that, to be honest, because you also need time. You can't just be a workshop leader, in my opinion, because you need to give people the reasons to come on your workshops. And if you spend all of your time just guiding workshops, like, yes, I photograph on workshops, but my focus when I'm guiding workshop is like making sure that my clients are happy and getting good photos. So most of the photos that I share that I use to grow my audience are not taken during workshops. They're taken like in between trips. So I need to make sure that I'm allowing myself time to go and do my own personal shoots to create work that is going to draw attention and make people want to sign up for the workshops. And also just to, I feel like for like mental health and all that sort of stuff, like balance the activities that I'm doing. And it's important not to be constantly guiding groups of people all the time.
Right. What's the most important piece of feedback you've gotten from people? Just maybe to wrap up here.
That's a really good question. I can't pinpoint this to like the exact one feedback thing, but one thing that I've definitely learned and that I've realized through just interactions with people in workshop is that it is good to know when to be direct and not give people options. Like, I know that this is going to be the best photo opportunity, so we are going to go there for that photo opportunity. So that, like, to know when to do that, and then to know when, okay, maybe there's a few things we could choose from, and when to pull the group and kind of feel out where and what we want to do. And to have the confidence in your own choices of like, if this is the best photo opportunity, like, be confident we are going for that best photo opportunity and not like, should we not? Just to be confident in your choices and just have faith in yourself as a workshop leader. You know this spot, you know these animals, like believe in yourself, I guess, is kind of the thing that I've learned from my clients. And also, I mean, I kind of been doing this from the start, but always ask your clients how they're doing, because some people are shy and they just can't figure out their autofocus on their camera. And then they don't tell you until like day 6 of a 7-day trip that they haven't been able to figure out the autofocus on the camera. And then you feel really bad that they did a whole trip without knowing autofocus on the camera. So sometimes it's really important to actually go up to people and be like, is everything good with your camera settings? Do you have any questions? Because sometimes people are a little shy and they won't come up to you, and you actually need to go up to them and make sure that everything's going okay.
Right. Liron, this has been so incredibly valuable and filled with information, I think, for people who, from the first half of our conversation about that photo, there was lots of nuggets of information in there. I think people should go back and listen to this again. And I'm not just saying that because I'm the co-host of the show. Seriously, you took us to school today, which is good, especially for people who are interested in running their own workshop. And we appreciate your time. That photograph that we talked about in the first half is brilliant, along with your other stuff. And, we're just appreciative for the hour you've had today. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. It's not normally the discussion that I have on a podcast. So this was actually like a first for me to talk about these sorts of more businessy side of things. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Excellent. Till next time.
Till next time.